John Deere has been the most trusted name in American farming for 188 years. It survived the Great Depression. It survived the farm crisis of the 1980s. It survived every recession, every drought, every downturn in commodity prices this country has ever thrown at it. And right now, in fields across Iowa, Illinois, and Nebraska, farmers who have run green and yellow equipment their entire lives are quietly trading it in for a tractor built 6,000 miles away, in a small Bavarian town most Americans have never heard of. This isn't a story about horsepower. Fendt tractors aren't cheaper than John Deere's, and in some cases they cost more. It isn't really a story about engineering either, even though the German machine has quietly out-engineered Deere on fuel economy for years. This is a story about what happens when the most dominant company in an industry starts treating the people who made it dominant like they can't be trusted with their own equipment. For decades, switching away from Deere was almost unthinkable in most farm country. Deere wasn't just a brand choice, it was a family decision, passed down the way a favourite hunting rifle gets passed down, generation to generation, dealership visit to dealership visit. So when that loyalty starts breaking in public, in dealer lots and auction yards from the Midwest to the Great Plains, something bigger than a single bad product cycle has to be going on underneath it. So here's the question this video is going to answer. How did a single American company build 53% control of the entire US large tractor market, then hand a European challenger the exact opening it needed to take that market apart, one farm at a time? To understand why this is happening, you have to go back to 1837, to a blacksmith named John Deere, working out of a small shop in Grand Detour, Illinois. Midwest farmers at the time had a specific problem. Their plows kept clogging with the thick, sticky prairie soil, forcing them to stop every few feet to scrape the blade clean. Deere took a broken steel saw blade, polished it, and shaped it into a plow that let the soil slide right off. He sold one plow in 1837, two the next year, then 10, then 40, then 100, doubling and tripling year over year until steel plows were the only kind worth owning. The company chased power for the next century. In 1918, Deere bought a struggling engine maker called the Waterloo Gasoline Engine Company, and within 5 years had turned it into the Model D tractor, putting Deere into direct competition with the era's dominant player, International Harvester. By the back half of the 20th century, Deere had done what International Harvester never managed. It outlasted its own catalogue of rivals, buying up construction equipment makers and forestry machinery companies, eventually building a farm equipment empire that today controls 53% of the US market for large tractors and 60% of the market for combines. No single company sells more farm machinery in America. Not close. That kind of dominance doesn't happen by accident, and it's worth understanding exactly how Deere built the trust that made farmers loyal for generations, because that same trust is exactly what's now cracking. Before we get into how, if you're enjoying deep dives into how empires like this get built and unbuilt, subscribing helps more than you'd think. Now, here's where it gets interesting. By the 1970s, John Deere wasn't just an equipment brand. It was closer to a piece of American identity. The company built that reputation through its dealer network, thousands of local shops where a farmer with a broken transmission could walk in, show a mechanic the part, and walk out the same day with the machine running again. Oddly enough, Deere's most famous slogan came out of its snowmobile division. In 1972, an ad agency copywriter named Bob Wright pitched a line that Deere executives initially rejected as too silly. He fished the discarded pitch back out of the trash the next day and presented it again. That line was, "Nothing runs like a Deere." It stuck, and once Deere folded the phrase into its tractor advertising, it wasn't selling a slogan anymore. It was selling a promise. Buy Deere, and when something breaks, and something always breaks on a working farm, you fix it yourself, in your own shop, on your own schedule. For most of the 20th century, that promise held. Farmers could open the hood, replace a sensor, swap a hydraulic pump, and get back to the field without calling anyone for permission. That independence mattered most on farms where a broken tractor during planting season could cost an entire harvest window. Deere's equipment was the backbone of a way of life built on self-reliance, and the company's dealer network grew alongside that reputation, eventually becoming one of the largest and most tightly integrated distribution systems in all of American manufacturing. Keep that in mind, because that same dealer network is about to become the centre of the entire story. But starting in the early 2000s, something changed inside Deere's tractors that had nothing to do with steel and everything to do with software. As Deere's equipment modernised, engineers embedded proprietary software into nearly every major component, from the engine control unit to the transmission to the hydraulics. On paper, this software made tractors smarter. GPS guided planting down to the inch. Sensors flagged engine problems before they became expensive ones. But there was a catch buried in the code. Even a simple repair, like replacing a sensor a farmer could install in 20 minutes, required an authorization code from Deere's own diagnostic software to activate the part. That software lived behind a login screen only authorized Deere dealerships could access. A farmer with a broken combine during harvest could no longer just fix it and move on. He had to call a dealer, sometimes drive the part to a shop, and wait, sometimes for days, while his harvest window closed around him. For an industry where a 2-week delay can mean the difference between a full bin and a ruined crop, that wait became the story farmers told each other at the co-op, at equipment auctions, at kitchen tables across the Midwest. The complaints built for over a decade before regulators finally took notice. In January 2025, the Federal Trade Commission, joined by attorneys general from Illinois, Arizona, Michigan, Minnesota, and Wisconsin, sued Deere directly, alleging the company had used its repair software to build an illegal monopoly over its own equipment's repair market. The complaint was specific. Deere provided its full diagnostic tools to authorized dealers, but withheld the same tools from farmers and independent repair shops, funneling repair work back toward its own dealer network and driving up costs in the process. That same year, Deere was also fighting a separate class action lawsuit from farmers covering repair costs going back to 2018. In April 2026, Deere agreed to pay $99 million to settle that case, while stating the settlement included no finding of wrongdoing. It was the first real crack in the promise Bob Wright had written on that scrap of paper back in 1972, and it wouldn't be the last. 3 months later, on July 8, 2026, the bigger case landed. Deere settled the FTC's antitrust lawsuit, agreeing to a 10-year court-supervised order requiring the company to give farmers and independent repair shops the same diagnostic software, repair manuals and service tools it had always reserved for its own dealer network. Daniel Guarnera, director of the FTC's Bureau of Competition, said the settlement lets farmers do what they've done for generations, fix their own tractors. Deere framed it differently. Denver Caldwell, the company's vice president of aftermarket and customer support, called it good news for our customers, adding it reinforced moves Deere had already been making toward more flexible repair options. Independent repair advocates weren't fully convinced it was a gift. Willie Cade, a board member at the advocacy group Repair.org, said the order gives farmers real hope, and cautioned that the real test would be whether Deere's follow-through matched what the order actually promised. Here's the analogy that makes this click. Imagine buying a truck, but every time the check engine light comes on, you need the dealership's permission just to plug in a code reader. That's what farming under Deere's old repair policy actually felt like, and it's exactly the kind of friction a farmer notices most during the 2 weeks a year when timing decides his entire income. While Deere fought these lawsuits, the broader farm economy turned against it too. Net farm income had fallen more than 25% from its 2022 peak. Commodity prices stayed low. In 2025 alone, tariffs cost Deere an estimated $600 million, forcing the company to raise prices on some 2026 models by up to 4%. Right as farmers had the least appetite to pay more. Deere's own numbers told the story. Farm and precision agriculture sales fell 16% in the third quarter of 2025. Operating profit in that division dropped 50%. The company laid off 238 workers across Illinois and Iowa that same month, adding to hundreds cut the year before. Deere was still the biggest name in the room, but for the first time in generations it was distracted, defensive, and bleeding trust exactly when a quiet German challenger had spent 30 years waiting for this moment. That challenger's story starts almost a century earlier and thousands of miles away in the small Bavarian town of Marktoberdorf. The Fendt family had run a clockmaking and metalworking shop there since the 1600s, and in 1930 the Fendt brothers built a small 6-horsepower diesel tractor they called the Diesel Ross, the diesel horse. It sold well enough that by the 1950s Fendt had become one of Germany's most respected tractor makers, known less for size and more for precision engineering. In 1995, Fendt made the bet that defined the next 30 years of its existence. At the Agritechnica trade show, the company unveiled the 926 Vario, the world's first high-horsepower tractor with a stepless, continuously variable transmission. Instead of a fixed set of gears, the Vario let power shift smoothly across an infinite range, the way a bicycle with unlimited gearing would feel compared to one stuck on 10 fixed speeds. It was a genuinely new way to move a tractor, and the industry noticed. So did AGCO, the American agricultural conglomerate, which acquired Fendt outright in 1997 for roughly $321 million. For the next 2 decades, AGCO did something unusual with its new acquisition. It didn't rebrand it, didn't fold it into a generic American lineup, and didn't rush it into the US market chasing quick sales. Starting in 2012, AGCO invested $300 million into German manufacturing capacity, doubled Fendt's North American dealership count between 2018 and 2019 alone, and spent years quietly training an entire generation of American dealers and mechanics on a machine most of their customers had never heard of. It was the same playbook Deere had used a century earlier to build its own dealer network, only this time a foreign challenger was running it against Deere instead of alongside it. By the time Deere's repair lawsuits hit the headlines, Fendt wasn't a foreign curiosity anymore. It had quietly become a company with something Deere's regulators couldn't legislate into existence. Real trust, built one dealership at a time. By 2025, that patient build-out was paying off in numbers AGCO could finally point to. Fendt's dealer coverage across the Americas had reached approximately 80%, up from a fraction of that 5 years earlier. AGCO's own annual report described Fendt's 2025 performance as its best year of market gains yet, with the company's largest wins coming specifically in North American large ag equipment, the exact category Deere had built its empire on. AGCO set a public target of $1.7 billion in Fendt sales across North and South America by 2029. The technology gap was showing up in independent testing too, not just marketing copy. Germany's DLG Agricultural Society ran its 2023 Power Mix Efficiency Test, an independent benchmark measuring a tractor's real-world fuel consumption against its output, and the Fendt 728 Vario came out on top as the most economical tractor tested. At Agritechnica 2025, Fendt collected the Tractor of the Year Mid-Power Award for its 516 Vario model, the 17th Tractor of the Year honour in Fendt's history, more than any other brand has ever won. Even the used equipment market started shifting. Andy Campbell, marketing director at auction data firm Iron Comps, pointed to resale data showing Fendt tractors holding value against Deere at auction, in a category American farmers had long assumed was permanently settled. That shift mattered because resale value is exactly the kind of number farmers pass along to their neighbours, the same way word about a slow repair used to spread through the same conversations. The overall pie was shrinking too, which made every percentage point matter more. The US agricultural tractor market was valued at roughly $9.7 billion in 2025, and industry researchers expected it to grow only slowly from there. In a flat market, a challenger gaining ground doesn't just win new customers, it wins them straight out of the incumbent's own base. None of this meant Deere was losing its grip on American agriculture. 53% market share doesn't evaporate in one bad news cycle. But for the first time since International Harvester folded decades earlier, Deere had a competitor that wasn't just cheaper or flashier. It was one farmers were choosing specifically because it hadn't spent the last decade making them beg for permission to fix their own equipment. And that comparison was about to get a lot more public. By early 2026, the contrast was impossible to ignore. Deere posted a fiscal 2025 built almost entirely on damage control. Net income for the fourth quarter came in near $1.1 billion, down 14% year over year. Company executives forecast North American equipment sales would fall another 15 to 20% in 2026. Deere President Deanna Cover told Farm Journal the ag economy is in a tough spot, and admitted the company was tightening its production model in response. Meanwhile, AGCO guided investors toward $10.4 to $10.7 billion in 2026 net sales, driven largely by Fendt. A GCO chairman and CEO, Eric Hansotia, pointed to excellent demand for our technology-rich Fendt tractors as the company's growth engine, even as the broader tractor market shrank around it. Deere wasn't standing still either. The company committed $20 billion to US manufacturing investment over the next decade, betting that staying cost competitive at home would eventually turn the cycle back in its favour. D.A. Davidson analyst Michael Schlisky put the moment in blunt terms, saying 2025 could go down as the lowest number of tractor sales in the history of modern agriculture. Whether that counted as the bottom of a cycle or the start of something more permanent was, by mid-2026, still an open question. Then came the reckoning Deere never wanted. On July 8, 2026, the 10-year FTC order took effect. For the first time in company history, Deere was legally required to hand independent shops and individual farmers the same repair tools it had guarded behind dealer-only logins for over a decade. USPIRG's Nathan Proctor summed up what the fight had always been about. "We should be able to fix our own stuff," he said. The FTC's order didn't ban John Deere tractors. It didn't hand Fendt a single sale. What it did was strip away the one advantage Deere had leaned on instead of competing on trust. By the time regulators forced Deere's hand, thousands of farmers had already made their decision without waiting for permission from anyone. They made it in dealer lots, at auctions, and in fields across the Midwest. One green tractor traded for one silver and black one at a time. So what actually happened here? It came down to three mistakes. First, Deere mistook market dominance for permanent loyalty. 53% of the large tractor market felt unbeatable, right up until farmers found somewhere else to go. Second, Deere let a repair policy built for convenience turn into a decade-long trust problem, one that regulators, not competitors, eventually forced the company to fix. Third, Deere underestimated how much 30 years of patient, unglamorous groundwork could matter. While Deere fought lawsuits, AGCO was quietly doubling dealerships, funding German factories, and training American mechanics on a tractor most of the country had never heard of a decade earlier. None of this means John Deere is finished. It still controls more of the American tractor market than all other manufacturers combined, and its $20 billion manufacturing bet suggests a company that still expects to win the next decade, not just survive it. Its dealer network, its resale value, and its century and a half of engineering trust aren't disappearing because of one lawsuit or one good German transmission. But for the first time since a blacksmith in Grand Detour built a plough farmers couldn't stop talking about, Deere is having to compete on something other than its own name. It's having to earn trust back, one repair, one harvest, one dealership visit at a time. That's the real story behind every farmer trading green for silver this year. It was never really about the tractor. It was about what happens when the biggest company in the room forgets that trust, once spent, doesn't come back just because you finally start acting right. If stories like this are your thing, the deep dives into how giants like this get built and unbuilt, subscribing is the easiest way to make sure you don't miss the next one. If you want to see what happens when an American giant gets caught flat-footed by a challenger nobody saw coming, the Caterpillar story is next, and it might be even stranger than this one.